She was only 6, a little girl, barefoot, bruised, and crying in the snow, her pink dress torn, her hand trembling, pointing toward the woods, toward a burning plane. No one stopped. No one. Until Ranger did. A retired K-9, and the soldier beside him, broken and alone, until now. What they found next will break your heart and give it back stronger. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country below. Let's see how far one broken whisper can reach. The wind off the Rockies cut through the pines like knives. It was barely dawn, but the sun never rose fully in these mountains during deep winter. Instead, a steel-gray light hung over the snowy peaks like a held breath. The forest floor, buried under layers of old and fresh snow, muffled every sound. Even the road, long, narrow, slick with black ice, looked like it hadn't seen a soul in hours. Driving alone in a faded green pickup, Noah Carter kept both hands firm on the wheel. His knuckles were rough, skin cracked from the cold, but he barely noticed. He rarely did anymore. At 44, Noah wore the quiet exhaustion of someone who had lived too many lives in one body. Tall and broad-chested, he looked strong at first glance, but his shoulders carried an invisible weight, and the deep lines on his face spoke of years that hadn't passed gently. His hair, once black, now held streaks of gray that matched his beard. The left side of his jaw bore the faint trace of a burn scar, almost hidden beneath a scarf. He had a mechanic's hands, scarred, blunt, capable, and an engineer's eyes, always calculating, always distant. He hadn't spoken to another person in over 4 days, and he preferred it that way. Noah had built a life of silence since the war. After the IED took out his unit and left him buried under metal and fire, there had been years of surgeries, medications, and nights when sleep felt more dangerous than combat. But worse than the pain had been the guilt. He was the one who'd done final checks on the route that morning. One missed signal. One false report. One decision that killed 5 men and left him alone with their screams in his head. People told him it wasn't his fault. The military cleared him. His therapist said the mind clings to blame because it craves control. But in the stillness of his cabin, when Ranger slept and the fire burned low, Noah could still see their faces. He remembered the smell of diesel and blood. So he kept to himself. No friends, no family, no visitors, just Ranger. The dog shifted in the seat beside him, ears perked. Ranger, his German Shepherd partner, had been with him through it all. At 7 years old, Ranger was muscular but lean, with alert eyes and a streak of silver fur across one ear. He wasn't just trained, he was disciplined, loyal, watchful. And when he growled, Noah listened. Because Ranger didn't growl without reason. Noah turned to him. "What is it, buddy?" Ranger's ears flattened, his body tense. He let out a low, warning growl and scratched the window. That's when Noah saw it. At the edge of the snowbank ahead, something pink. He braked hard. The truck slid slightly, tires crunching over packed snow. Noah opened the door, the cold hitting him like a slap. Ranger jumped out ahead of him. As he neared the figure, his breath caught. It was a girl. She couldn't have been older than 6. She sat hunched, her back to the road, arms wrapped tight around her chest. Her pink dress, thin and torn, was soaked through and stiff with frost. Her legs were bare, knees scraped, one foot bleeding. Her dark brown hair clung to her pale face in icy strands. She didn't cry. She just shivered, small and silent like a bird too weak to fly. Noah knelt beside her, heart thudding. Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't flinch, but her eyes met his. They were huge, hollow with cold and fear. "My name's Noah. This is Ranger," he said gently. "Can you tell me your name?" She opened her mouth, but only a whisper came out. "Sophie?" Her voice cracked. She lifted a shaking hand and pointed, out across the snow-covered trees. Noah followed her finger. There, just beyond the ridge, a thin column of smoke curled into the sky. Not from a chimney. Too far, too sudden. It was gray, steady, unnatural. He stood, instincts kicking in. "Ranger, go find." The dog took off at once, leaping through the snowbank and vanishing into the trees. Noah turned back to Sophie. She was fading fast, her lips blue, eyes glazing. "Stay with me," he murmured, pulling off his heavy coat. He wrapped it around her, lifted her easily. She weighed so little, and carried her to the truck. He blasted the heater, tucked a blanket around her small form, and set a bottle of water next to her. She barely moved, but her eyes followed him as he closed the door again. The wind screamed louder as Noah followed Ranger's trail on foot, boots sinking into the snow. His lungs burned. He was not as young or fast as he used to be, but adrenaline cut through fatigue. As he moved deeper into the woods, memories clawed at him. Not just of war, but of the time 3 years ago when he had stood at the edge of Bear Creek Gorge with a gun in his mouth. It was Ranger who had stopped him then, not by barking or biting, but by pressing his head against Noah's chest and letting out the softest, most human sigh. That touch had pulled him back from the edge. Now, Ranger barked ahead, sharp, urgent. Noah pushed through a thicket and stumbled into a clearing. There it was. The wreckage. A small private plane, ripped open down the middle, lay half buried in snow and debris. The tail was bent at a grotesque angle. One wing had snapped off completely and was lodged into the ground like a broken spear. Smoke drifted lazily from a blackened engine, and a trail of scorched trees marked the plane's descent. Ranger stood near the front fuselage, pawing at the twisted metal. Noah stepped closer and froze. Through the cracked window, a figure, a woman, unconscious, slumped forward, blood on her temple. Blonde hair, tangled and matted against her cheek. Noah's breath caught. The resemblance to the girl was instant. Her mother. He pressed a hand to the cold metal, feeling the heat still faintly radiating from within. He didn't move to open the door yet. His legs felt suddenly heavy, not from fatigue, but from memory. Another body in a mangled frame, another stranger he couldn't save, another moment where life dangled on a thread and the wrong decision meant another ghost to carry. His hands trembled, not from the cold. This wasn't a mission. This wasn't war, but it felt the same. The weight, the panic, the need to act, and the terror of failing again. "Not this time," he whispered. "Please, not this time." He reached for the emergency latch, heart pounding. The smell of scorched metal and fuel was heavy in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of pine and cold. Noah Carter crouched beside the plane's broken frame, eyes fixed on the unconscious woman inside. Her face was pale, smeared with blood across the forehead, and a gash stretched from her temple into her blonde hairline. Her seatbelt cut across her chest, still fastened tight, and her right arm hung at an unnatural angle, possibly broken. But she was breathing, faintly, shallowly. Noah exhaled slowly, wiping snow from his brow with the back of his glove. He had seen this kind of crash before. Twisted wreckage, quiet bodies, silence after impact. It brought back memories from war zones, downed helicopters, smoke trails in the desert, the way sound vanished when death was near. This time, though, he wasn't leaving anyone behind. He braced one hand against the fuselage and pulled open the door with a grunt. The metal screeched in protest, but gave way. Ranger stood at his side, eyes fixed on the woman, tail still, breath fogging in the frozen air. "I've got her," Noah muttered. "Stay close." He climbed up and gently unbuckled the belt, one hand steadying her neck. She groaned softly, head rolling against his shoulder. As he lifted her, he felt the heat of her body against his chest, dangerous in this cold. He didn't know how long she'd been trapped here, but if the plane had gone down overnight, hypothermia was a real threat. She was taller than expected, perhaps 5'8", thin, with narrow shoulders and long legs. Her face, though bruised and swollen on one side, was sharp and elegant, with a small scar just below her left cheekbone. Her name came back to him as he glanced at the dog tag sewn into the inside collar of her coat. Claire Morgan. He descended slowly from the wreck, boots crunching on frozen debris. Ranger stayed pressed to his side as he made the trek back toward the road. The path was thick with snow and branches, and it took everything Noah had to keep steady with her in his arms. Each step burned his thighs, but he never looked back. When he finally reached the truck, Sophie's small face was barely visible through the fogged window. She perked up the moment she saw Claire. Her hand smacked the glass, her lips parting in a breathless cry. "Mommy!" Noah opened the door and carefully laid Claire across the back seat, adjusting her limbs as gently as possible. Sophie crawled toward her mother, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She's okay," Noah said, crouching down to meet Sophie's eyes. "She's hurt, but she's alive. I'm gonna get you both warm now, all right?" Sophie didn't speak. She looked at him, really looked, her eyes wide, then slowly nodded. She slid back under the blanket without protest. Noah slammed the door, turned up the heater, and checked his phone. No service. Not surprising, not up here. He tried the emergency channel anyway. Static. The crash must have knocked out the antenna. He glanced toward the sky. Storm clouds thickened overhead. Another front was moving in. There was no way to wait for help. He looked at Ranger. Let's get them home. The road to his cabin was slow and rough. Noah drove with one hand on the wheel, one eye on Claire's shallow breathing in the rearview mirror. Occasionally she stirred, muttered something under her breath, words lost in pain and cold. At one point, she groaned louder, her eyes fluttering open for a second. No. Prototype. Not safe, she mumbled, then fell back into unconsciousness. Noah frowned. Prototype? He glanced again, studying her features. She wasn't just some casual traveler. Her coat was a custom fit, her boots military grade. Her nails were short and clean, not manicured. Her wrist had a faint tan line where a watch used to be. Professional. Precise. He stored the thought for later. It took nearly an hour to reach the cabin. Snow crunched beneath the tires as the truck pulled up to the small log house nestled between dense pines and the frozen lake beyond. The place was modest, built by hand, one level, stone chimney, solar panels dusted with white. It had been Noah's retreat from the world. Now, it was the only shelter these two had. Ranger jumped out first, circling the truck as Noah carried Claire in, then returned for Sophie, wrapping her tighter in the blanket. Inside, the warmth was immediate, wood-burning stove glowing bright, the scent of pine and cedar heavy in the air. Noah laid Claire on the couch, then knelt to light a second fire in the small bedroom. He brought out an emergency medkit, began cleaning the blood from Claire's head, and made a rough splint for her broken arm with sticks and bandages. Meanwhile, Sophie sat cross-legged by the fire, still wrapped in the thick wool. Her cheeks were no longer blue, and her eyes followed Noah's every movement. Ranger, stay close, Noah instructed. The dog lay down between Sophie and Claire, his body a wall of warmth and watchfulness. Noah brought over a cup of warm water and a slice of bread. You hungry? Sophie nodded hesitantly and reached for the bread with small, trembling hands. What's your name? He asked gently, even though he already knew. Sophie, she said softly. You did good today, Sophie. You stayed strong for your mom. Her lips trembled. She was flying the plane. Daddy wasn't with us. Noah blinked. She was flying? Sophie nodded. Claire wasn't a passenger, she was the pilot. That changed everything. Later that evening, as night crept in and the storm thickened outside, Noah sat by the fire with a notepad, trying to piece it all together. A woman flying her own small jet. A child on board. A crash. A cryptic message about a prototype. And no emergency beacons, no signals, no rescue teams on their way. Something didn't add up. He looked toward the couch. Claire stirred again in her sleep, sweat now building on her forehead as her body fought through shock. Her lips parted. They'll come, she whispered. The storm descended like a curtain of white fury. By nightfall, snow had swallowed the clearing around the cabin, burying tracks, trees, and any sign that something had crashed nearby. Winds slammed into the log walls with brutal force, howling like distant sirens. The wood stove crackled louder than usual, and the old chimney groaned under the strain of keeping warmth inside. Noah Carter sat beside it, poking at the embers with a metal rod, one eye on the fire, the other occasionally drifting to Claire Morgan, who still lay stretched across the couch. Her face was less pale now, flushed slightly with warmth. He had changed her bandages an hour ago, refreshed her with water, but she hadn't woken. Until now. A sudden cough escaped her lips, then her body tensed. Noah turned quickly, kneeling beside her. You're safe, he said, voice low and calm. You're in my cabin. Your daughter's here. You both made it. Claire's eyes fluttered open, glassy and uncertain. Sophie? She's okay. In the bedroom. Sleeping. Claire blinked hard, then tried to sit up. Instinct more than strength, but grimaced at the pain in her ribs and arm. Easy, Noah said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Your arm's broken. You hit your head. You've been unconscious for most of the day. She fell back with a sharp breath, then stared at him. "You're not police." "No," Noah said. "Just a guy with a cabin and a dog." She stared a moment longer, then exhaled deeply, eyes softening just slightly. "The plane, it went down, didn't it?" "Yeah." Claire turned her head, then whispered, "Damn it, I knew it." Noah narrowed his eyes. Knew what? She looked at him with a seriousness that pushed through her pain. It wasn't a malfunction. It was sabotage. Someone tampered with the avionics. There was a pause, a sharp, weighty silence. Claire Morgan, even exhausted and injured, had the bearing of someone used to command. She was in her late 30s, tall and lean, with sculpted cheekbones and a defined jawline that suggested both elegance and resolve. Her hair was blonde, but now matted with dried blood, and her voice, though cracked, carried an undercurrent of control. "I'm the CEO of Novarise Technologies," she said, meeting Noah's gaze. "We're developing a neural interface, something that could help paraplegics control prosthetics through thought. We call it the Lucent Link." Noah blinked slowly. "I've heard of that. Military's been watching your prototypes for years." Claire gave a tired nod. "Exactly. And someone else has been watching too. I've been getting threats for weeks. Emails, intercepted messages. I never reported them because I didn't want panic in the company. We were finally close." Noah sat back, arms folded. "And the crash?" "We were headed to a secure testing site in Wyoming," she said. "Weather was clear when we left. But then, the controls stopped responding mid-air. I had emergency protocols. They didn't work. Whoever did this knew the system inside out." Outside, the wind screamed louder, like a warning from the trees. "You're saying someone tried to kill you?" Noah asked. Claire looked down, then nodded. "And I don't think they're done." The door to the bedroom creaked open. Sophie stood there, wrapped in a quilt, clutching a stuffed rabbit Noah had found in the supplies box. Her eyes were wide, but calmer than before. "Mom," she whispered. Claire reached out her good arm. "Come here, baby." Sophie rushed forward and curled beside her, small and warm. Claire kissed her forehead, wincing from the movement. "I told the man about the smoke," Sophie murmured. Claire looked over at Noah. "She saved us." "I just stopped the truck," Noah said gruffly, standing and tossing more wood into the fire. Sophie leaned against her mother's side and said softly, "They used to call. Mom would tell them to stop. She cried sometimes." Claire brushed her daughter's hair, clearly trying not to show how the words hit her. Noah turned toward the window. The snow was still coming down, now with less wind but heavier flakes. The power would stay out for days, and if Claire was right, if someone had wanted that plane to fall, then the crash wouldn't be the last threat. Ranger let out a short bark from the mudroom. Noah walked to the door. The German Shepherd stood tense, nose pressed against the base of the door, ears stiff. He growled, low, uncertain. Then he moved to the window and barked again, sharp and louder this time. Noah grabbed his flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. The wind cut across his face, sharp as razors. Snow had buried everything in sight. He swept the light along the tree line, then down to the path in front of the cabin. And there, they were faint but undeniable. Footprints, not his, not Sophie's, not Claire's. Someone had come close and left. He scanned the woods but saw nothing, just snow-covered branches swaying in the stormlight. He returned inside, locking the door, bolting it twice. Claire sat upright now, her face pale again. "What?" she asked. "Someone was here," Noah said. "Walking, watching." Claire's jaw tightened. Sophie looked from one adult to the other, then reached out for Ranger, who padded over and laid down beside her like a living shield. Noah moved to the fire, grabbed his shotgun from above the mantel, and checked the rounds. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a siege. Morning came slowly, a dull gray pressing against the frost-covered windows. The storm had softened, but the snow hadn't stopped. It fell in steady, whispering layers, covering the tracks Ranger had found the night before. Noah stood on the porch with a mug of weak coffee, shotgun leaning against the railing. His breath misted in the cold, his eyes scanning the tree line beyond the clearing. Something didn't feel right. Then he heard it, the low, distant hum of an engine. Not from the road, too muffled for that. This came from the woods. Noah set the mug down carefully and reached for the scope tucked inside his coat. He brought it to his eye and swept the trees. There, Two black snowmobiles cutting silently through the pines, approaching fast but deliberately. The men on them were bundled in dark winter gear, faces obscured by helmets with mirrored visors. Professional, coordinated, not lost hikers. Ranger, standing alert beside the porch, let out a deep growl. Noah ducked back inside, heart tightening. Claire sat on the couch, half propped up by pillows, feeding Sophie small bites of oatmeal. Both looked up as he entered. "Visitors?" he said flatly. Claire's face drained of color. "Who?" "We'll find out." He loaded the shotgun calmly, then set it aside just out of reach but in view. When the knock came, it was soft. Too soft for the heavy boots he'd glimpsed. Noah opened the door halfway. The man in front was tall, broad-shouldered, with a clean-shaven face flushed from the cold. His coat was sleek black, fitted with reinforced seams, and a patch on the sleeve reading, "Ever North Private Response." His voice was smooth, practiced. "Mr. Carter, we received a signal from a downed aircraft, small jet, 2 passengers. We're from a private rescue firm hired to assist. We believe you may have found survivors." Noah kept his face neutral. "We did." The man nodded slightly. "May we come in? One of our medics can check the woman and we'll coordinate extraction. Roads are still blocked, but we've got a chopper prepped once the weather clears." Noah glanced over the man's shoulder. 3 others waited near the snowmobiles, 2 men, 1 woman. All dressed alike, no visible weapons, but posture too stiff, too alert. Not mountain rescue. "I've got it handled for now," Noah said. "She's stable, child too." The man smiled thinly. "Of course. Mind if we wait here until extraction is possible? Safer together." Ranger's growl deepened. The hairs on his back stood up, muscles rigid. "He doesn't like strangers," Noah said, stepping onto the porch and pulling the door shut behind him. "You said you're from Evernorth?" "Yes." "Funny," Noah said casually. "I know someone in their Denver office. I'll radio to confirm." The man hesitated for half a second, just a flicker, but enough. "Denver's lines are down from the storm. We're the only team out here." Noah tilted his head. "That's so?" He stepped down the porch, boots crunching snow, and walked toward their vehicles. The group behind the leader shifted, slightly tense. "I used to build equipment like that," he said, motioning to the snowmobiles. "Can I take a look?" The woman stepped forward, petite but stern. She had pale skin, short brown hair tucked under her cap, and her jacket bulged oddly near the hip. Noah caught it. Sidearm. Concealed. Poorly. He leaned near one of the vehicles and spotted a rifle case half tucked under the supply tarp. Definitely not standard rescue. He turned back toward the group, smiling faintly. "All right, let me get you something warm." He returned inside, shut the door behind him, and locked it twice. Claire sat rigid now. "It's them, isn't it?" "They're not rescue. Armed, trained, said the wrong things." Sophie clung tighter to Claire's side. Noah moved fast. He packed water, food, thermal blankets, 2 flares, and an old radio into his emergency rucksack. He slipped Claire's arm into a proper sling he fashioned from a scarf, helped her stand. "There's a trail behind the cabin, runs northwest. Abandoned Fire Watch Road. If we keep moving, we'll hit a ranger station in 12 miles. "I can't walk 12 miles like this," Claire whispered. "You won't," Noah said. "We go slow. Ranger knows the path. He'll lead." He crouched before Sophie. "We're going on a secret hike, okay? Ranger's the guide. He'll keep us safe." Sophie nodded, eyes wide but trusting. Noah doused the fire, masked their scent trail with ash and snow, then ushered them quietly out the back. Ranger moved ahead, sniffing, leading them into the thick woods beyond the clearing. The snow was deep, nearly knee-high in places, but the path, though hidden, was familiar to Noah. He had used it many winters ago during survival drills. They moved in silence, every step deliberate. Ranger stopped often, ears rotating, body low. Once, he froze entirely. Then he turned sharply and barked once, loud and fast. Noah moved instinctively, dragging Claire and Sophie back. The snow gave way inches ahead of where they would have stepped, a hidden ice fracture, thin enough to collapse into the creek below. Ranger circled around, found a safer pass, and waited. "Good boy," Noah whispered, rubbing the dog's side. Ranger panted once but kept going. Hours passed. The light began to fade. By the time they stopped for breath beneath an overhang of frozen rock, Claire was shivering violently, Sophie half asleep in her arms. Noah lit a small heat pack under a thermal blanket and pressed it between them. "They'll find the cabin," Claire said through clenched teeth. "Let them," Noah replied. "They won't find us." He looked toward Ranger, who sat alert at the edge of the outcrop, watching the trees. "We just have to make it until morning." The wind had died down by morning, but the cold remained, biting and unrelenting. Snow still blanketed the trail as Noah, Claire, Sophie, and Ranger reached the outskirts of the nearest town, Timber Falls. A small mountain community tucked between pine-covered ridges, it was a place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers never arrived unnoticed, let alone limping from the woods, half frozen and wearing desperation like a second coat. The first to spot them was Sheriff Mary Ann Holloway. In her early 50s, Mary Ann was sturdy and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked black hair tied in a low ponytail beneath a Navy sheriff's cap. Her skin was weathered by mountain sun and winter winds, and her green eyes held the cool confidence of someone who had pulled more than one wrecked hiker out of the wilderness. She stood on the porch of the town's small ranger station, sipping from a thermos, when she noticed the figures staggering toward town. Within minutes, Claire was being lifted into the back of a battered emergency truck driven by Frank Yates, the town's only paramedic, a wiry man with sunken cheeks and gentle hands who'd once been an army medic. He was quiet, efficient, his gray eyes full of concern as he wrapped Claire in heated blankets and set an IV. "You're lucky," he muttered, checking her pulse. "Another hour out there, and you might have lost that arm. Or worse." Claire winced but gave a weak smile. "I've had worse days." Noah stood back, watching silently, snow melting from his shoulders. His jaw was clenched, muscles tight, as if still waiting for a threat to emerge from behind the trees. Ranger sat beside him, ears twitching at every sudden sound. Sophie leaned against the dog, small fingers buried in his fur, face hidden in his side. The moment Claire was stabilized, she reached for a nearby deputy's phone and made one call, to her company's crisis line. The second call came from somewhere else entirely. By the time Claire was loaded onto the town's only stretcher and wheeled into Timber Falls Medical, word had already begun to spread. Not just in town, online. A private plane had gone down. The CEO of Novarise Technologies, presumed dead, was alive, and she wasn't alone. 3 hours later, the first local news van arrived, then 2 more. By nightfall, national outlets had caught the scent. At the center of it all stood Noah, who now found himself standing on the steps of the ranger station, surrounded by lights and microphones. He wore his old military jacket over a thermal shirt, snow-soaked jeans, and worn boots. The lines on his face looked deeper under the studio lights. He didn't like this. Not the attention. Not the noise. A young female reporter pushed her mic forward. "Sir, is it true you saved Claire Morgan's life?" Noah looked past her, to where Sophie was sitting inside the station, with Sheriff Holloway and a cup of cocoa. She was laughing softly as she braided a thin strip of red yarn. "I didn't do it alone," he said, voice gravelly. "He found the girl." He nodded toward Ranger, who sat calmly at the edge of the porch, posture noble, eyes scanning the crowd like he was still on patrol. Cameras swung to catch the dog, snapping frantically. The reporter smiled. "Can we get your name, sir?" "Noah Carter," he said reluctantly, "former U.S. Army, Mechanical Division." Another camera light clicked on. "And the dog?" "Ranger. He served too. Afghanistan 2016 to 2019. K-9 search and rescue." Claire's voice called out from behind the press line. She was now in a wheelchair, a blanket around her shoulders, arm in a cast, and head bandaged. But her gaze was steady, her voice clear. "I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for them," she said, loudly enough for the whole street to hear. "A soldier and his dog. That's who pulled me from that wreckage, not just from the snow, from something much darker." Reporters turned as one. Claire rolled forward, ignoring the aides trying to hold her back. "The people who brought my plane down don't want the truth told," she said. "But I'll say it now. I was targeted. My company's work threatens powerful interests. But thanks to this man and this dog, I have another chance to make it matter." The square erupted in a tangle of questions, flashes, and shouts. Noah stepped back, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing more. Later that evening, after the press had dispersed and the medical staff had taken Claire back inside for observation, Noah found himself sitting on a bench near the station's front garden, lit by soft lanterns buried in the snow. Sophie walked up slowly, her tiny boots crunching. She held something in her hands, a small red knitted scarf, fraying at the edges. "I made this with Sheriff Marianne," she said quietly. "It's for Ranger." Noah looked at the scarf, then down at the dog beside him. Sophie leaned forward, looped the scarf carefully around Ranger's neck, and tied it into a loose, clumsy knot. "So he won't be cold, like I was." Ranger gave a soft chuff, nuzzled her shoulder, and sat straighter, like he knew the moment carried weight. Sophie beamed. From the station window, Sheriff Holloway watched with crossed arms and a rare smile. Beside her, a woman in her late 20s stood silently, Kayla Jensen, one of the town's volunteer search coordinators. She had short blonde hair, a heart-shaped face, and a camera slung around her shoulder. Kayla had been documenting wilderness rescues for years, and now looked at Noah and Ranger with the unmistakable spark of a story that needed to be told. "Think they'll be all right?" she asked. Holloway took a sip of her coffee. "If anyone can carry that kind of burden and keep walking, it's them." 2 days after the storm broke and the headlines cooled, Claire Morgan sat upright in a sleek black SUV, watching the glass doors of Novarise Technologies glide open ahead. She looked different now, her shoulder-length chestnut hair brushed back into a practical bun, a navy coat framing her sharp features. Though her left arm still rested in a sling, her gaze was focused and unflinching. The oxygen of the wilderness had cleared her mind. Now she was back where her war was being fought, behind tinted windows and billion-dollar smiles. Noah sat beside her in silence, hands resting on his knees. He wore a clean utility jacket, boots freshly brushed, and a buttoned shirt that didn't quite hide the weight of his unease. He'd spent a decade avoiding boardrooms and glass towers. Now, he was stepping straight into one. Novarise's headquarters was a modernist monolith of steel and smart glass, nestled between Denver's financial district and the snow-kissed foothills. Inside, everything hummed with quiet luxury. Marble floors, biometric scanners, coffee machines that cost more than trucks. Claire's personal assistant, Dana, met them in the lobby. Dana was in her early 30s, short and athletic, with tight curls dyed auburn and a freckled nose. Efficient and warm, she greeted Claire with a genuine, "You look like hell. Good to see you." Then her eyes flicked to Noah. "So, you're the dog man." Noah raised a brow. "And he's the dog," he said, gesturing to Ranger, who trotted calmly at his side with his signature red scarf still tied. The office workers paused to glance as they passed, some recognizing Claire, others whispering about the guy who pulled her from the wreck. They took a secure elevator to the 14th floor. As the doors closed, Claire finally said, "I need you to see something. But after that, if you want to walk away, I won't stop you." Noah didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence was weighty, a soldier's answer. Inside Claire's private office, everything looked untouched, except the file safe. Its digital lock had been surgically removed, wires still exposed. Claire's hands clenched. She limped to her desk, pulled open a lower drawer, and took out a tablet. She scrolled silently before turning it toward Noah. The screen showed schematics, neural pathways, wireless interfaces, a spinal implant shimmering in 3D. "The prototype," she said, "a biosynaptic controller, meant to restore motor function for paralysis victims. We were 90% there, and now..." She clicked again. A data trail appeared. Logins from unauthorized locations, remote downloads, hidden transfers to a secondary server, one not owned by Novarise. Noah narrowed his eyes. "Who has access to this?" Claire hesitated. "Only me and the CTO. But that server, it's tied to an offshore holding account, and that account links back to Quantum Core." The name hit the room like a dropped blade. Quantum Core was Novarise's largest competitor in neurotech. Their CEO, Garrett Sloan, was a man who wore Italian suits and lawsuits with equal ease. Once Claire's mentor, now her bitter rival, Garrett was tall, silver-haired, and shark-eyed. Rumors swirled about bribed regulators, sabotage schemes, and shadow firms built solely to dismantle others. Nothing proven. Everything whispered. "I trusted him," Claire said softly, "until he made a play for the board." I stopped him. He didn't forget. Noah stepped back. You think he had your plane taken down? I think he knew just how close we were, and that someone on my team helped him. Silence settled again. Then Ranger growled. Low, quiet, focused. Noah turned, immediately alert. Ranger wasn't looking at Claire or Dana. He was staring at the backpack in the corner of the room. Sophie's backpack. Noah knelt, unzipped it. Inside, next to a crumpled coloring book and a plush pink elephant, was a small plastic toy. A squeaky giraffe. Nothing unusual, until Ranger barked, sharp and loud. Noah grabbed the toy and twisted its belly. Something clicked. Inside was a black microchip, the size of a fingernail. Tracker, Noah muttered. It was never the cabin. They followed her. Claire's face went pale. I gave that toy to her. Last month. Said it was a conference freebie. I didn't even think... They knew where she was the whole time, Noah said, voice dark. Which means they'll try again. Ranger sat back on his haunches, still staring. Claire reached for her desk phone. I'm putting security on her. But this changes things. Sloan isn't just stealing code. He's playing dirty. She looked at Noah, the weight of every betrayal on her brow. I need someone I can trust inside. Someone who knows how to think like a soldier. Will you come on board, officially, just until I get to the bottom of this? Noah leaned back, arms crossed. I build engines and fix broken metal, not spy games. But you saved my daughter, Claire said. You didn't walk away then. His jaw tensed, then softened. For Ranger, he said. Claire smiled, but it was weary. For all of us. Later that night, back at the hotel arranged by Nova Rise, Sophie curled up on the bed with Ranger beside her. She traced the outline of the scarf she had tied around his neck. Do you think they will try to take Mommy again? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ranger gave a soft whine and nudged her cheek. From across the room, Noah stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker. The war he thought he had left behind had simply changed battlefields, and now it had found its way back to him. The Denver Convention Center gleamed like a glass cathedral under the pale winter sun, its banners flapping in the cold wind. Nova Rise's bold logo stood above the entrance, a symbol of defiance and innovation. Inside, the atmosphere thrummed with anticipation. Reporters setting up cameras, technicians fine-tuning equipment, and guests filtering into rows of sleek white chairs. This was the day Claire Morgan had staked everything on. Claire stood backstage in a tailored charcoal suit, her posture upright despite the sling still around her arm. Her hair was neatly styled into a low chignon, and though her eyes held exhaustion, they burned with intent. She hadn't slept much, but she'd memorized every cue, every word of the keynote. The new neural interface would change lives, especially today, with Sophie as the demonstration subject. Sophie, in a powder blue dress and tiny black boots, clung tightly to Ranger's red scarf. The little girl looked more like a porcelain doll than a test subject, but her dark brown eyes were brave. She'd practiced for days, under supervision, connecting her thoughts to a custom-designed robotic arm. It was simple. Lift a ball, wave at the audience, smile. But today wasn't just about technology. It was about healing, publicly. Noah watched everything from behind the curtain, hands tucked into the pockets of a navy coat that hadn't quite lost its wrinkles. He wasn't comfortable in crowds, let alone high-tech showcases, but Claire had asked him to stay close. His role wasn't just support. He was her shadow, her shield. Ranger sat at Sophie's side, alert. His black and tan coat had been brushed until it gleamed, but his nose twitched, ears rotating. He sensed the change before anyone else. Near the rear of the center, in a server bay marked "Authorized Personnel Only," a thin man in his 40s, wiry build, narrow eyes, salt and pepper stubble, inserted a modified flash drive into the core router. He wore a staff badge and carried a clipboard, blending in seamlessly. His name was Lyle Jennings, former software engineer. Fired from Nova Rise 3 months earlier. Quiet, introverted, but known for grudges that aged like wine, sharp and dark. He grinned as the progress bar on his laptop reached 100%. The malware he'd written would trigger just seconds after the demonstration began, scrambling the neural signals, corrupting outputs, and broadcasting the failure live. Backstage, Sophie was about to step into the spotlight when Ranger let out a low, vibrating growl. His body tensed. Noah stiffened, then moved. "He smells something," Noah said to Claire. "Stay with Sophie." He ran through the side corridor, Ranger at his heel, following the scent. Hot plastic, machine oil, and adrenaline. At the server room, the door was ajar. Ranger barked sharply. Inside, Lyle yanked the flash drive free and turned, startled. He bolted, but Ranger leapt, teeth sinking into the man's coat and pulling him down with terrifying precision. Noah arrived seconds later, pinning the attacker as security piled in. "Server's been compromised," Noah growled. "Shut the system down." Meanwhile, on stage, the lights dimmed and Claire took the podium. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Then static hit the main screen. The robotic arm convulsed, wires trembling. Technicians scrambled. Murmurs grew louder. Claire's voice cut through. "System fail detected. Stand by for switch." Her eyes found Dana, the assistant, now operating the backup terminal. Dana, a quick thinker with auburn curls, clad in all black, nodded and entered the override sequence. "Fallback version initiating," Dana announced over comms. Claire turned to Sophie, who looked unsure. "You've got this," she whispered, "just like we practiced." Sophie closed her eyes. A moment later, the backup interface linked. The robotic arm lifted the ball. The crowd held its breath. Sophie turned to them, smiled faintly, and waved. Applause erupted. The danger had passed, but the message had landed. Nova Rise wouldn't be stopped. Later that evening, police escorted Lyle Jennings out in cuffs. His motives were confirmed, paid off by Quantum Core to sabotage the launch, with the promise of a new job and a generous bonus. But one thing hadn't gone to plan. He hadn't counted on the dog. Ranger stood proudly as reporters swarmed Claire. Flashbulbs popped. Someone shouted, "Was it really your daughter controlling the system?" Claire nodded. "That was Sophie. She's 6. And yes, she's already braver than I'll ever be." "And the dog?" Claire smiled. "Ranger is why we're still standing." In a quieter corner, Sophie wrapped her arms around Ranger. From her pocket, she pulled out a tiny metal star, a trinket from the gift bag earlier that day. "It's for heroes," she said softly. "Mom says you're mine." Ranger licked her cheek in reply. Noah leaned against a nearby wall, arms crossed, a rare glint of something almost like pride in his eyes. He still didn't like the spotlight, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth standing in it, if it meant Sophie would never have to face the dark alone again. 6 months had passed, yet the mountains of Colorado still bore their crown of snow. The sharp bite of winter remained in the air, though softened now by the coming spring. The forest trail, once treacherous and cloaked in danger, had been cleared of fallen limbs and layered ice. A quiet hush settled over the clearing where the wreckage once lay, now just a faint scar in the earth, overgrown with frost-hardened moss and scattered pine needles. Noah Carter stepped out of the SUV, brushing snow off his coat. He wore a navy utility jacket, worn jeans, and sturdy boots, but the man inside them had changed. His gait was steadier, his shoulders less hunched. His once perpetual scowl had given way to a quiet, reflective calm. There were still bad nights, moments when the ghosts clawed their way back, but fewer now and less sharp. At his side trotted Ranger, the 7-year-old German shepherd with eyes like storm clouds and a red scarf wrapped around his neck. Faded now, but still warm. The dog had become something of a celebrity since the launch, his name whispered in newsrooms and child-friendly morning shows. But to Noah, he was still just his dog, his lifeline. Claire Morgan emerged next, the sleek city woman changed by months of grounding. Her hair, once tightly pinned and polished, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore a gray coat belted at the waist, a knitted cap, and snow-dusted gloves. Her injured arm had healed, though she still stretched it often, as if testing the memory of pain. With her came Sophie, bundled in a pink puffer jacket, leggings, and snow boots, her breath fogging as she ran ahead, clutching a small tree sapling in her mittened hands. "Here!" Sophie called, pointing to a small open patch near the spot where the wreck had been. "This is where Mommy was lying, but now it's not scary anymore." Noah nodded, kneeling beside her. He dug into the earth with a camping spade, breaking through the frost layer, and helped to position the sapling. An oak, only 3 feet tall, its roots wrapped in burlap. Claire stood a few steps back, silent. The wind played gently with the strands of her hair as she watched the two people who had come to mean more to her than any boardroom ever had. "We'll water it in spring," Sophie said seriously, "and every time we visit, it'll grow taller, like Ranger." Noah chuckled. "He might not grow, but he'll sure as hell guard it." The tree was placed carefully, roots tucked in, soil packed around the base. Sophie patted it once, then whispered something to it. "What did you say?" Claire asked, kneeling beside her. "I told it it's safe now," Sophie said, "that this is a good place to grow." They stood for a long while in silence, looking at the little tree. Then Claire pulled a phone from her pocket and raised it. "Group photo," she said. "Don't argue, Noah." He smirked. "Wouldn't dream of it." She set the timer, propped the phone on a nearby rock, and joined them. The image it captured, Claire kneeling, one hand on Sophie's shoulder, Sophie smiling wide, arms around Ranger's neck, Noah standing behind them, hand resting gently on Ranger's back. Snow fell softly around them. In the background, the forest stretched quiet and deep. That photo would hang in their shared home, an old, remodeled farmhouse on the outskirts of Boulder. Claire had moved out of the city to be closer to Sophie's new school, and with Noah's help, turned the property into a hybrid. Tech lab by day, cozy home by night. Noah now served as Novarise's lead technical advisor on defense applications, and though he still hated traffic and meetings, he was thriving. Their dinners were noisy. Sophie always had stories, Claire had ideas, and Ranger barked when it got too loud. On weekends they hiked, Claire baked. Noah finally fixed that leaky faucet. They weren't perfect, but no one pretended anymore. One evening, months after the tree was planted, Sophie brought home a crayon drawing. 4 figures under a snowy sky. Claire with her brown hair, Sophie in pink, Ranger with his scarf, and a man with big boots and a quiet smile. "This is us," she said, beaming. "Our family." Claire blinked, trying not to show the tears gathering in her eyes. Noah reached for the drawing and smiled. "Not a traditional family," Claire said. "But it works," Noah replied. Ranger barked once, softly, like punctuation. And so the days passed. The oak grew slowly, even as seasons changed. The trail near the crash site became something new, not a place of loss, but of resilience, of second chances, and of quiet promises kept. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with lightning or trumpets from the sky, but with quiet steps in the snow, a bark in the silence, and the outstretched hand of a broken man learning to heal. That winter, a little girl in a red coat was saved, not just by survival, but by love, courage, and a soldier who chose to stop. And maybe that choice was never his alone. Maybe God still works through tired hands and loyal dogs. Maybe what happened in those frozen woods wasn't just coincidence, but grace. If you believe that every soul deserves a second chance, if you believe in redemption, in quiet miracles, in family born not of blood, but of kindness, then share this story. Leave a prayer in the comments for every child still waiting to be found, and for every soldier still learning how to come home. Subscribe for more stories that remind us, hope isn't lost, it's just waiting to be noticed.